guys, it's me Helena. Welcome back to my channel. I hope you're having the most magical day. I want to talk about Saturn today, and specifically the Saturn return. I want to share with you how you can predict your own Saturn return, the stories and themes that may come up for you during this time in life between 29 and 31 years old. Saturn is one of the slowest moving planets. It makes an orbit around the sun every 29-ish years. And it's one of the most important outer planets when looking at our natal chart and our transits specifically. Everyone goes through a Saturn return between the ages of 29 and 31, again around the ages of 58 to 60. I find that Saturn and Uranus transits to be some of the biggest deals when looking at our transits and predicting our life, and specifically the Uranus square and opposition, the Uranus return that happens when we're around 84 years old, and then of course the Saturn squares, Saturn oppositions, and the Saturn return. Saturn represents maturity, aging, time, slow. It's a slow energy. It's about this sense of wisdom or knowledge that's gained from hardship and personal experience. And when we go through Saturn transits, it's really a time when Saturn is almost ushering us forward into maturity, into our adulthood. It's about the slow progress, the hard work, the dedication, the slow building of something. And it takes a lot of time, effort, and obstacles in order to get through that. And so Saturn returns are times when we're really going to be confronted with what it is that we need to know and learn in order to grow into who we're meant to be. People who finish their Saturn returns around 32 years old, they are usually fully in their natal promise, really. A lot of astrologers will say that you have not fully become your chart or activated your natal promise until your Saturn return. A book that I highly recommend for anyone who wants to learn more about Saturn is The Greatness of Saturn. These are the myths of the East Indian Vedic tradition, from the East Indian Vedic tradition, and all about the myths and the stories about the energy of Saturn and what it represents. This is a really great book. It has so many beautiful pictures. I'll include a link down below if you want to get it, but I'm currently reading this at the moment and I'm really enjoying it so far. The nature and energy of how your Saturn return will play out in your life is all dependent on your natal chart. And I have seen so many clients and people who have really difficult Saturn returns where it's just a really hard few years, depression, it's a time of sadness, it's a time of grief, it can be a time of difficulty with things. A lot of people I've also seen in the news, just for my own personal studies, of people who often get convicted for crimes or for terrible things that they've done. They usually go through a court trial or they go to jail during or right after their Saturn return finishes. This is something that is entirely dependent on the natal chart and the nature of Saturn in the chart. For others, Saturn can be really beneficial. For some, Saturn can be helpful and constructive and can actually help you really create your life's great work. And like your greatest work in life is created during the Saturn return. So it depends on the natal chart. It depends on how it's placed. And so let's talk a little bit now about how to predict your Saturn return, or how to tell if it's going to be a really difficult Saturn return or a little bit more positive. The first thing we want to look at in the natal chart is to see the sect of your chart. Do you have a day chart or a night chart? If you have a day chart, that means the sun is above the horizon in the natal chart, in the top half. And so when we see that, that means that Saturn is going to be your moderate malefic, meaning it's not going to be as difficult as Mars will be. If you have a day chart or your sun is the ruler of your chart, then that means that Mars is your malefic, not Saturn. Saturn is going to be moderately malefic, but not as difficult as Mars will be. Now, if you have a night chart or the sun is below the horizon or in the bottom half of your chart, that means that Saturn is your biggest malefic and Mars is moderately so. So anyone who has a night chart or your moon ruled, that means the Saturn return may be more challenging and more difficult for you. I'm a Hellenistic astrologer, and so I use the traditional ancient techniques used in 1st century BC, notably Valen's work, and I use a lot of Hellenistic techniques to determine how well a planet is in a chart. And one of the things that is really helpful for Saturn, if you can see this in your natal chart, is if a planet, or specifically Saturn, is enclosed by the benefics, meaning both Venus and Jupiter are sending a ray or shooting a ray to Saturn and it's enclosed or surrounded by degree, or in a sign-based orb to Saturn. So there's some sort of protection or kind of like this enclosure to Saturn. So that's something that you can really look at. One of the ways we can predict what area of life our Saturn return will take place in is to look at the house. I use whole sign houses. That's just my personal belief system. Everyone has to use their own house system that they find to be true. I have used Placidus for over 10 years. I do not agree with Placidus at all. It is not my chart. I've looked at my friends' charts. It's not like Placidus does not work for me or the people in my life that I know personally. So for me, I highly recommend whole sign houses, but to each their own. Everyone has to use their own house system that works best for them, that they can most relate to and connect with on their natal chart. Wherever your Saturn is placed is going to show you the area of life or the topics and themes that Saturn will bring up during your Saturn return. I'll include a little picture here of the different houses in your natal chart and what they represent. So look to see where you have Saturn in your natal chart and those themes will be brought up. Another thing that you can look at besides the house, the aspects, and the sect of your chart is to also locate the ruler of the sign that Saturn is placed in. So for example, my Saturn return is in Pisces. I would look to Jupiter in my natal chart to see what other area of life is somehow connected to where my natal Saturn is located. The other thing we want to look at is the aspects to your natal Saturn. If you've got a square to Mars, that can be a bit tricky. If you've got a hard aspect like an opposition or even a conjunction sometimes, or a square to Pluto or Mars, that can be really tricky. So that just adds another layer to the difficulty or the level of difficulty of that Saturn return. I hope that this video helps you and supports you in any way. Please know that the Saturn return is an important time, and it's all something that we all have to go through. Going through the Saturn return is like, it's a rite of passage, and we want to make it through the Saturn return. Like, for me, that is like, I've always wondered and been curious about what's going to happen to me during the Saturn return. It's something I've been thinking about since high school. Don't fear your Saturn return. Don't be afraid of it. If you've got a difficult Saturn, it'll be a few challenging years, but I find it's far better to know when something difficult is going to happen than to just be completely surprised by it and caught off guard. It's better to be over-prepared than to not be prepared at all. At least that's my personal view of things. Have you also gone through your Saturn return already? Are you about to go through it? I'd love to hear about your experience during those years, 29 to 31, also 58 to 60, see kind of what themes came up for you and if they were similar, because Saturn returns bring up similar themes again and again when we go through them. So I'd love to hear from you. I'm sending you such a big hug. I hope you have a magical day, and I'll see you next time here on the channel. Bye.